The sun was setting over the small town of Greendale, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalks and peeling paint of the old buildings. In the midst of this struggling town, a mother named Lila moved quickly through the streets, her children clinging to her sides. The youngest, a little boy of 5, kept asking when they would eat, and his sister, only 8, had dark circles under her eyes from hunger. Lila had done everything she could to provide for them, but the job market in Greendale was unforgiving, and the small savings she had were quickly disappearing. That evening, desperation weighed heavily on her shoulders as she approached the modest grocery store that had become a symbol of hope for families like hers. Inside the store was dimly lit, the flickering fluorescent bulbs casting a harsh light on the rows of shelves, stocked unevenly with goods. Lila approached the counter, clutching a few coins in a worn paper bag, her hands trembling slightly. She had come to ask for something simple, just a small portion of food, something that would tide her children over until she could find a way to earn enough to feed them properly. The store manager, a man named Conrad, noticed her immediately. His face, etched with arrogance and impatience, bore no sign of sympathy. Lila took a deep breath and spoke softly, almost apologetically. "Sir, I only need some food for my children. They haven't eaten all day." Conrad's eyes narrowed as he leaned on the counter, his tone sharp and cutting. "Do you know how many people come in here asking for free food every week? I can't just give everything away," he snapped. Lila's heart sank, but she tried again, her voice steady despite the quiver in her hands. "I only have a little money, sir." "Anything? Just enough to make dinner for them tonight?" Conrad's face twisted with irritation. He slammed a fist on the counter, making Lila jump. "Enough, I don't have time for your sob story. Leave my store before I call the police." For a moment, Lila froze, the words of the man echoing in her ears like a cruel drum. She had expected rejection, perhaps, but never this aggression. Her children tugged at her hands, sensing her despair, and she swallowed her fear. "Please, we're just hungry," she whispered, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. Conrad sneered, shaking his head as he waved them away. "Get out, now!" he barked, and without thinking, he lunged forward, grabbing her arm roughly to push her toward the door. Pain shot through her as he yanked her forward, and she stumbled against the counter, her coins scattering across the floor. It was then that the sound of engines broke the tense moment, a roar that echoed down the street and made Conrad pause. Lila barely had time to glance over her shoulder before a group of bikers appeared, speeding down the narrow street on sleek motorcycles, the headlights cutting through the dim evening light. Their leader, a tall woman with a fierce glare and a leather jacket emblazoned with a striking emblem, skidded to a stop in front of the store. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice commanding, and everyone inside froze. Conrad's face drained of color as he realized he was facing more than a few concerned citizens. He was facing a force that would not tolerate cruelty. The bikers moved as one, surrounding the store in a semicircle, their presence intimidating and resolute. Lila's heart pounded, a mixture of fear and hope rising within her chest. The leader, who introduced herself as Raven, stepped closer to Conrad, her boots clanking on the pavement. "You heard a woman for asking for food for her children?" She spat, anger sharp in her tone. Conrad stammered, trying to regain control, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. I was just enforcing the rules," he protested weakly, but no one was listening. Raven's eyes blazed, and she gestured for her team to move in closer. "Rules? You think there are rules for abusing someone in need?" "Not while we're around," she said, her words heavy with warning. Conrad backed away, his hands raised in surrender, and for the first time that day, Lila felt a surge of relief. The bikers ushered her and her children out of the store, offering her a warm jacket and a small package of food they had brought with them. She could barely speak, her gratitude spilling over as she hugged her children close. "Thank you," she whispered repeatedly, her voice breaking. Raven smiled faintly, her fierce demeanor softening slightly. "No one should go hungry, especially kids," she said simply, as if the principle was obvious. Yet somehow so few followed it. As the bikers mounted their bikes and revved their engines, Conrad slumped against the counter, humiliated and shaken, realizing that his cruelty had met immediate consequences. The store itself seemed to shrink under the weight of what had just occurred, the arrogance and aggression of its manager now exposed and impotent. The next morning, the town of Greendale was abuzz with whispers about what had happened the previous evening. Lila and her children sat at a small wooden table in the living room of their modest apartment, unpacking the food that Raven and her team had left for them. It wasn't just enough to fill their bellies for one meal. There were fruits, vegetables, bread, and even some treats for the kids. Lila's heart felt heavy and light at the same time, grateful for the strangers' kindness but aware of the precariousness of her situation. She knew she couldn't rely on others forever, but for now there was hope. The news of the bikers' intervention had spread quickly through town. By mid-morning, Conrad's actions had become the topic of conversation in every corner of Greendale. The townspeople, many of whom had suffered similar indignities, began to take notice of how swiftly justice had been served, albeit outside the formal system. Some praised the bikers' courage, others whispered about the recklessness of taking matters into their own hands. But for Lila, the judgment of others mattered little. She could see the fear still lingering in Conrad's eyes when she passed by the store later that day, and she knew that her children's need had been acknowledged in a way that no money or coin could measure. Life, however, had a way of testing even the strongest of spirits. Lila returned to her search for work, determined not to let desperation control her future. She visited every shop, every small business in town, and despite numerous rejections, she refused to give up. Each day she reminded herself of the bikers' support, their unexpected intervention, a symbol of resilience and solidarity. Slowly, opportunities began to emerge, temporary positions that, while modest in pay, offered stability and a chance to rebuild. Her children, seeing her determination, began to regain a sense of security they hadn't felt in months. Meanwhile, the bikers themselves became something of local legends. Raven and her team, once strangers, were now known faces, often seen patrolling the town streets and offering assistance where it was most needed. They didn't expect recognition or gratitude, but their presence inspired change. Conrad, on the other hand, struggled to regain the confidence of his customers. The humiliation of being confronted and outnumbered by a group he had underestimated made him rethink not only his behavior but his approach to running the store. Slowly, grudgingly, he began to treat people with more respect, aware that in a town like Greendale, cruelty could have swift consequences. Months passed and Lila's life gradually improved. She had secured a part-time job at a small bakery. Her children were fed and clothed, and the fear that had once haunted every step she took began to dissipate. Yet she never forgot the night the bikers had intervened, the roar of their engines, and the fierce determination, in Raven's eyes, etched into her memory forever. It had been more than a rescue. It had been a lesson in courage, community, and the power of standing up for those who cannot defend themselves. One afternoon, as Lila walked past the grocery store with her children, she noticed Conrad watching her from behind the counter. His expression was tentative, almost apologetic, and for the first time, she didn't feel fear. She simply nodded, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. Conrad, in his own way, had changed, and though the town of Greendale still bore the marks of hardship and struggle, there was now a sense of vigilance, a shared understanding that cruelty would not go unchallenged. The bikers had left their mark, not just through their intervention, but by showing that standing up for what was right could ripple through a community, transforming lives in ways that were impossible to ignore. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the town once more, Lila sat on a small bench outside the bakery, watching her children play. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to breathe fully, to feel hope without the gnawing anxiety of hunger pressing against her chest. The world was imperfect, filled with people like Conrad. Yes, but it also contained individuals, like Raven and her team, people who refused to turn away from injustice, who acted when others would only stand by. And for Lila, that knowledge was more sustaining than any meal, more powerful than any coin she could earn. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, courage and compassion could arrive unexpectedly, changing the course of lives in ways that nothing else could. Greendale, a town marked by struggle and resilience alike, continued its quiet rhythm. But for Lila and her children, life now held a promise that had once seemed impossible, that even in a world full of hardships, there were people willing to fight for what was right, ensuring that no one had to face hunger or cruelty alone.